What's up guys, I'm Rich from Spray Black Studios, and today it's time to delve back into that Cursed City box, this time for some speed painted skeletons. So following doing my video of painting up the hero, Emelda Braskov, I threw a little poll up on my community tab of what you guys would like to see me attempt out of this box next. Now, despite there being some of the more interesting hero miniatures in the poll, the choice that won, rather surprisingly, was the skeletons. Now I'll be honest, when I first picked up Cursed City, I was really excited about a good number of miniatures of both the heroes and the villains. But the skeletons weren't one of them. Skeletons are often seen as pretty simple to paint, and if you're a Vampire Counts player from Fantasy, this was a godsend. Just paint the bone, paint the metallics and slap some washes over, and you're done. If I want to make a match up with the Emelda Braskov miniature though, I'm not going to be able to just take the easy route. So today I'm going to use this as an opportunity to push the quality of my speed painting. My aim is to get these guys as close as I can to the mood and the feel of that Emelda Braskov miniature that I've painted, but I want to get them all done in one afternoon. So to start off, as I always do, I sprayed them black. I've used the Vallejo surface primer, as unfortunately the weather still continues to be pretty grotty over here in the UK, and the Vallejo surface primer lets me do it all with my airbrush. To keep in fitting with what I've already done, I'm going to be using a nice desaturated palette, and we're going to start very monotone, letting the details and the weathering give us some pops of colour. For all the material areas, I'm going to be following the method from a previous video, and we'll start off with a nice dry brush of Citadel Dawnstone, and then once that's dried, I'll add another much more gentle dry brush layer of Celestra Grey, just to give those final highlights. Now currently, this all looks a little bit too grey for my liking, so I'm going to use everyone's favourite Nuln Oil to darken this all down while still keeping some of those highlights in place. I love this technique for doing material as it is super simple, but if you're wanting to show some nice battered and warm material, it's really quite effective. After a couple of coats of Nuln Oil, I want to add a little bit more wear and tear to the material, so with another very quick dry brush of Dawnstone, I'll bring back the strength of some of those highlights, and then mixing up some Zandri Dust and Dawnstone, I'll dry brush this mix really gently just over the lower parts of the robes. This gives them a slightly brownish tint to the highlights, and it makes them look like they've got some pretty solid and caked in dirt. Now the material's done, it's time to start on the next biggest volume, the metallics. I want these guys to fit in with pretty much the same palette as my Emelda Braskov miniature, so I'm going to use a pretty similar method for the metallics. Starting off with a Vallejo metal colour Magnesium as my base coat for all of the armour plates and for the metal parts on the shield and the weapons. I'm going to keep all those metallics the same, as this will not only reduce the palette down and make them look a little bit more consistent, but it'll also save me a lot of time, and this is a speed paint after all. To provide a bit of variation on those metallics, I'll grab out an old and slightly beaten up dry brush, and using some Citadel Iron Breaker, I'll stipple this onto all those armour panels. I've used Iron Breaker instead of the Vallejo metal colour paints, as it is a bit thicker and it's much easier to apply in this manner. Now I want the chainmail to stand out, so I'm going to use this as an opportunity just to add a little pop of colour. With a base coat of Runelord Brass, I'm going to start to build up a nice gold colour. Runelord Brass is rapidly becoming one of my favourite Citadel paints, as it has got great coverage and a really nice finish. Now I do want a little bit more colour in this gold, so the highlights are going to come from a little bit of Retributor Armour. Normally, I'm not a massive fan of this for the Grimdark stuff, as it is super saturated and really yellow, but we can easily deal with this a little bit later with some washes. For the bone of the skeletons, I want to try and go as simple as possible. With a couple of thin coats of Rakarth flesh, this will give me a nice starting point. Rakarth flesh is another one of those paints that actually gives a real solid coverage, even over black. It is a little bit too dark for us just to roll with this, however, especially when we're going to be adding some washes and some weathering later on. So I'm going to need to add some highlights, and for this I'll use Pallid Witch Flesh. Those of you who have been watching this channel for a while may know that I absolutely hate this paint, so if anyone has any suggestions for a fitting replacement, I'm all ears. Now there's just one more colour I want to block in before I get to the fun stuff. For those leather and wooden areas, again I'm going to fall back on an old familiar method. Using some Rhinox hide as a base coat, I'll pick out all those belts and straps and wooden areas. Again, for these I want to keep them pretty subtle, so sticking with a nice dark brown will add to the palette but won't stand out or be too distracting. To highlight these and just to give them a little bit more depth, I'll pick out the edges with Steel Legion Drab and give the wooden areas a very nice light dry brush of the same. Normally I'd go at least one more highlight layer above this, but we do need to save some time, so this will do for the moment. So now with all the main colours locked in, it's time for the fun part, adding some washes. For the gold I want to give it a little bit more definition, but I also want to keep the warmth in that colour, so a light wash of Reikland Flesh Shade will do the trick nicely. This will deepen those recessed shadows and tie it in nicely with the weathering that is to come. For the bone areas, a nice wash of Agrax Earthshade is going to give all we need to add some recessed shading, and again those nice brown tones will help to add a nice unified feeling across the model. Now all those steel areas look all a bit bright and shiny, so it's time they got dulled down a little, and you know what that means? More Nuln Oil. You can probably now see why I go through quite a lot of Nuln Oil wash. Whilst I'll definitely say that an oil wash would be preferable here, it does also take a lot longer to dry and to work with, so since we're trying to paint these quickly, I'm going to stick with these acrylic washes instead. For the weathering, however, the enamel washes are coming out. Using some of the AK Interactive Rust Streaks, I'm going to add some weathering and some rust onto all those armour plates and to the weapons. Mixing the rust streaks with some white spirit, I can thin it down enough to create more of a wash, and this will not only reduce the effect a little, but it'll also help it to draw down into the recesses a bit more, which is where all that rust would naturally start to build up. When it dries, the finish is not quite as strong as when it is first applied, so don't worry too much if it's starting to look too bright and orangey at the moment. Once I've let it dry for about 20 minutes, I'll then head back in with a cotton bud dipped in white spirit, and using dabbing and rolling motions with this, I'll reactivate the paint and just remove it from the upper areas of the armour and the weapons, leaving all that rusty goodness in the recesses. This is definitely one of my favourite steps and really starts to give these models an aged look to them. Their armour and weapons are in complete disrepair, so it's time they look the part. To add a little bit more colour in and to give that armour another element of weathering, I'll grab some Nihilakh Oxide, and being very careful not to overdo it, I'll gently apply this around some of the rivets and in some of the indents of the steel areas, just to give an impression of some more oxidation to the metal. I usually find that this step is very much a case of less is more. It's very easy to overdo this effect, and whilst a small amount can be very complementary to what you're doing, too much can get distracting, so just start small and you can always add more on. It's tough to take it back off. For the last bit of weathering, I really want to make all those rusty areas really pop, and unfortunately I find that all the rust streaks is awesome, it's just a little bit too dark. So grabbing out some of the Vallejo Old Rust Weathering pigment, I'll apply this to all of those indents and the areas that I want to build up more of a rusty look. Whilst it's alright to have a little bit escape, I will try and target this a little bit more than usual, so I'm going to use a nice smaller brush to apply. As I have applied these dry, they can easily be removed from all of the higher areas with a nice soft and dry brush, leaving a nice orange rust in all those recesses, really selling the aged and ruined look of that armour. And with that, the skeletons are done. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, then please hit that like button and throw a comment down below just to let me know what you thought of these skeletons. I will be continuing to paint miniatures from this Curse City box, so please feel free to let me know if there's any that you'd like to see me tackle. I know that I have a few requests and there are a couple that I'm really looking forward to attempting. So hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, that way you won't miss out. If you want to help support the channel, then please feel free to share this video to any of your friends that you feel may be interested. And down in the description down below, I have included my affiliate link for the awesome guys at Firestorm Games, where you can get pretty much anything you need for your hobby. I can't promise that they've got Curse City in stock though. Thanks again for watching, guys, and remember, if all else fails, spray it black and start again.